Thank you for joining us today. I'm really delighted to be with Julie Grace, who is the head of research and editorial at checkout.com. And we will be discussing about the potential of high performance payments. This short and sweet session is really a preview of the upcoming second edition of Checkout's survey-based report in collaboration with Oxford Economics. The inaugural research, Black Boxes and Paradoxes, was covering the period of the start of the pandemic in 2020. Now we are 3 years later, and clearly business leaders are more prepared or more aware to acknowledge the strategic significance of payments. Merchants' awareness of the potential value of payments and its role in optimizing revenue and supporting growth strategies has clearly increased. Despite this heightened awareness, the updated report shows that in 2022, a total of over 50 billion was lost to the digital economies of the US, the UK, France, and Germany, thanks solely to falsely declined payments. This is a huge increase from the 20 billion recorded back in 2019 in the previous report. Julie, this is clearly a huge increase, about 150% in false declines over these past 3 years. Is this simply linked to the overall increase in digital payments as, e-commerce did boom? Can we explain it that way? And is the C-suite really concerned about these numbers?
Yeah, great questions, both of them. And thank you for the introduction to the research and the report, Effie. Really appreciate that. So to take your first question around, is the increase merely a reflection of what we know to be a much larger market, which famously kind of grew a lot during those years during the pandemic, is one of the first questions we asked when we saw the numbers, and we asked Oxford Economics to run their calculations and compare like for like and see how it compares year over year. And what they said was, if you take into account the market size, back in, actually it was 2019 that they ran the first model, and then look at the market size in 2022, the relative increase in volume accounts for, or you could say that it accounts for about a third of the increased loss that we now see as a result of false declines. That leaves 2/3 hanging of that kind of 150% growth. So numerically, it only accounts for a third. But I guess when we looked at the findings and thought about why has it become so much worse? Why is something which should just be actually performing so much worse? And in many ways, thinking about it, it's likely that it has a lot to do with the growth of the market, because the market has simply become a lot more complicated. Many more players, many more consumers operating in really different ways, and necessarily changes in regulation updates in sort of what the schemes are looking for, what the issue is. If we think about things like network tokens and SCA, all these things that play a part in whether or not a payment can successfully go through when you have a good actor with funds in their accounts. Those are just a few examples. I think there's also the huge growth in cross-border, we think, has likely also played a part.
Increased complexity at many different levels, it seems, has to explain these figures.
I think it does likely explain a lot of it. And while we wouldn't wish any of that complexity away, because it's all part of a dynamic, living and growing ecosystem, it just really, well, apart from maybe the fraud, maybe we'd wish that away. But the rest of it is a natural part and a good part of the growth of e-commerce. And so the question really is then, how do you tackle those issues head on in order to improve payments performance?
What would you suggest should be the number one KPI that the C-suite of merchants in all sorts of businesses should be monitoring with regards to this complexity in payments?
Yeah, again, another really good question. And I guess you asked previously about, is it really the case that the C-suite is acknowledging, as they tell us in the survey, that payments can and should be more than simply a cost center, that they could be a revenue driver or a driver of growth in some way? And I think a lot of the time, the KPIs they'll be looking at are around cost and shaving costs where they can. So I think that's often the lens they see it through. But I think that also increasingly, when we speak to those in charge of payments within merchant businesses, who we call payments leaders, they tell us they're on a real advocacy journey. They're beating the drum for just how important well-performing payments are and how you can prove that on the bottom line. And I think it's interesting. I spoke to various merchants as part of the research who listed a number of KPIs. So there's fraud rates, there's costs, there's conversion, and then there's acceptance rates as well. And they talked about ROI as a much better way of understanding what you're getting from it versus purely cost. But of course, how you measure ROI is really complicated with payments, and also very much depends on your objectives and your business model, and so on. And so I think a lot of the time they were coming down to the number one most important KPI that we look at as a business is acceptance rates, because that's where you're seeing what's actually getting through, what's making it over the hurdle of that payment process when you've spent so much money on customer acquisition. And those who come to reading the report will also see what a painful cost that is when the acceptance rate is not performing or is not good, because increasingly people, very sort of digitally savvy shoppers, are now going immediately to a competitor with their money. So I think they see acceptance rates as important, as part of their competitive advantage, I guess. Having said that, and I know we don't have huge amounts of time to delve into this, that there are obviously many nuances when it comes to acceptance rates. What's right for one business or one sector or one region will really vary. And I think increasingly that's something that the payments leaders are very, very keenly aware of. And it's perhaps taking longer for those nuances to filter up, to the CFO level. I think,
Julie, I understand that in this research, there's been a variety of merchants, in different industries, hospitality, from retail, e-commerce, financial businesses, and so on. So, of course, there's different objectives and different measures, but the nuances in acceptance rates, are they, the complexity, is it really coming from the fact that there's been this speed or acceleration in the commerce business and in changes and feeling the competition to add new payment methods and new revenue streams? And is all that creating the nuances in measuring acceptance rates?
I don't have a sort of hard and fast answer to that. I guess that is quite technical. I think one thing that certainly comes across is that not all acceptance rates are created equal, and where you're getting that measurement from and how your PSP is measuring it is not always clear. So is it including chargebacks or not? Is it including retries or not? These are sort of small things that are important, because if there's any point in having any sort of metric, it's only useful if you know the exact parameters that are being applied. And I think what came across when we did our survey of the very large sample is that a lot are just not getting the transparency on that. And so they know it's a useful metric, they know it's an important KPI, but they understand it's a slightly blunt instrument as it exists at the moment. I think your point around all these new payment methods and different channels is obviously playing a part in the complexity. Often though, and that's obviously with exceptions, but we would normally see that where merchants have opened up new payment methods, probably a local payment method, let's say operating in a specific region where if they've opened that new local payment method, it's likely to actually increase the acceptance rates, and that would be a good thing for their business.
One of the figures that you shared with me, Julie, as the report will be published next week, and that struck me, was that over 70% of merchants are reporting complexity layering of payments because of different providers, tech providers, and also because of patchwork of legacy players. So given that, and I don't think this is surprising, this type of complexity that is reported through the survey. Given that, where should merchants start looking for blind spots in terms of their payment optimization, and especially when in partnership with all sorts of different payment providers and not just one?
And that's a good question. And I guess probably in detail, better answered by partly our technical people and also our customer support teams, who I'm very happy to put people in touch with them following the conversation, because I think it is just a sort of complex and nuanced thing to navigate. I think ideally we would say that a conversation with one of your providers, at least, which really offers some expertise, which really helps to marry your objectives as a business and your business model and the business model you're planning for the next years ahead, and marry that with a payment strategy. And then once you've got that, start looking at the control you want as a business over your payments in order to meet that kind of strategic objective. And have you got that control? Have you got access to the data? Have you got the visibility? If actually, as a business, you're not particularly interested or resourced to take that control, but you do know what you want, then it might be about finding a provider who's less giving you all the data and the visibility to do it yourself, but actually things like machine learning and AI solutions now can kind of ensure that tailored approach, but without putting it on your team to kind of pull it off. I think the point is about finding somebody who understands and can support an approach that is not like a sledgehammer, is more like a scalpel, is a finely tuned thing. Because I think that's where, when we think about payments performance, things often go wrong when it's a sort of blanket approach.
And clearly, there's a lot of opaqueness. Merchants often don't know what they will get charged, what the cost of
Yeah.
processing the payments is ahead. So even something simple as that, that you would think is clear and simple and is happening, is not happening, right?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. And one of the interesting findings from rerunning the research 3 years on is that, as well as the cost of false declines having gone up so much, we see in the data that merchants are reporting very little difference in terms of what they feel they're getting from their payments providers, both in terms of visibility, access to data, support, sort of advice, that sort of thing. Of course, there is a chance that things have got better, but merchant expectation and need has got bigger and it's not keeping pace, essentially.
Yes.
That's
Yeah.
slightly
It's
hard
a
to.
moving target, right?
Yeah, exactly. A very moving target. But either way, they are feeling underserved a lot of the time. And yeah, I think that's an
You
interesting.
mentioned already how potentially AI and machine learning solutions, whether it's in collaboration with the payment providers or outsourced, if you like, could address some of the pain points
Mm.
um, around monitoring performance of payments for strategic reasons of the business. I- From the study, from the research, are there any use cases, real use cases that you could share with us today ahead of time that show the value of this?
Yes, there are some great case studies featured within the report. I think from the research itself, it came back about 83% of merchants saying that they're not currently benefiting from an AI machine learning tool that helps them, or a solution which helps them with their payments performance. So it's clearly a new area. It's an area that at Checkout we're really super excited and proud to be working in. And some of you may have seen that only yesterday we launched our intelligent acceptance product, which is an AI machine learning solution. And it's, I suppose, back to this point of like, you can't take a sledgehammer to something as kind of finely tuned as and complex as payments. And I think I remember a merchant saying to me, with payments, you can kind of be the jack of all trades or potentially be the master of one. And that's on a good day. To get to being, and that's not going to deliver optimal results. And to get to being really driving every bit of revenue out of your payments that you possibly can is just so complicated. And I think that's where we see something like our intelligent acceptance, which uses huge data sets in real time to respond dynamically and in a tailored way to each merchant, can suddenly start to quell those pain points that we've traditionally seen that have probably given rise to the numbers that we see in the report. So we're really happy to feature within the report case studies from Klarna and 𝐟𝐢𝐧𝐝𝐢𝐬 and a number of other merchants that we've been working with, that we worked in the beta phase with for intelligent acceptance and saw really meaningful and measurable uplift. And so we use those as kind of use cases that the reader can actually start to apply some. They've understood the problem and now they can start to understand steps towards a solution to that problem.
Interesting. Julie, let's see if our audience has some questions around what we've already discussed.
One of our viewers had sort of made a comment on the post that you put up ahead of the event, where he talked about a question about if customers are losing,
if they are paying the cost of these losses.
Yes, exactly. Costs being passed on, especially if we think about FX in certain circumstances or interchange fees, that sometimes that's painful for the customer, but also the irritation factor and just loss of loyalty from customers ultimately. And we've seen that with the statistics in the report that show in the last 3 years, patience has just gone out of the window and people will move on and also never come back following just one single false decline in much kind of greater numbers than they did 3 years ago. I think his question was around whether payments performance is thought of as a customer issue, as well as just a sort of issue that pertains to the bottom line and is rather dry. And my answer to that question would be based on the conversations we've had with our merchants, and you'll see that in the qualitative interviews in the report. Yes, absolutely. They see it really as an emotive issue, something that is core to CX. And yeah, so I thought I'd address that question since I said I would.
It's a great question because, you know, we've spent more time looking through the lens of the C-suite, the CFO, because as you know, initially mentioned, payments have traditionally been seen as, you know, a cost center that needs to be monitored to reduce the costs. And we've moved to what we like to call in Fintech payments 4.0, in the sense that they are a very integral part of the strategy of the business, no matter what business you're in, because of the analytics and because of their interactivity and because of the personalization that is enabled with the technologies today for the customer experience. So it's not, you know, a different payment alternatives are not simply because, you know, I don't have one and I prefer the other. It's about enabling the businesses to create a different customer experience and create more loyalty. And that, you know, Klarna is a great example of that in the fintech world, which is really an e-commerce marketplace, although we were looking at it as a fintech place in the beginning, just because they innovated with this buy now, pay later payment experience. But it's really a customer experience that has proven to be connected with the bottom line of the business. We have another 5 minutes, Julie, and what I'd like to allude on is there's a part of the report that talks about how all this, the payment performance, is connected to the culture of the business, which I found very interesting. And, I hadn't thought of this aspect around the business culture. And I think that is also showing how qualitatively things have changed in terms of strategy and branding, and how businesses are much more sensitive to their public image and how to use the payment experience to unlock a real value, intangible value for which customers are with the business.
Yes, absolutely. It is really interesting. And I think it goes right back to what we were just talking about in terms of the customer experience piece. And that was one of the quotes in the report, where they're saying payments are always a cultural thing. And if you want a good company culture, then and if you're a consumer serving company and culture matters to you, then the way in which payments are experienced and the kind of not having the insult of a false decline, they are really, really important. Particularly, they were citing examples, buying your groceries online, that's access to food, sending remittances home to another country, which can, in extreme cases, be life-saving. So there's all those aspects of it that they talk about, but also the fact that it is a very culturally nuanced thing. So how people like to pay market by market, we've seen in all our sort of localized research that we've done as well, is so cultural, and also not just in terms of payment methods, but also how they like to shop. And if we think about the popularity of live streaming, so shopping on live stream and sending payment links, particularly in APAC, and how in certain other countries that we looked at that just hasn't caught on, there are all these things that we're seeing come through as being very personal, I guess.
Yes, and not siloed anymore from the business strategy. And plus, as you said, the increase in cross-border commerce, either because people travel, but mainly because people order, and the cross-border experiences and cross-border payments continue to be very important and complex for the businesses.
To go back to one of the very first questions about it becoming a more recognized point even at the sort of C-suite level, some of the data seems to suggest that a lot of that is kind of getting fingers burnt when first moving across borders and sort of putting all this investment into new market presence and not having thought about payments, and suddenly like their target audience just can't reach you because those cross-border payments haven't been thought about. And that's learning the hard way. But we saw about, I think 43% of merchants surveyed said that they hadn't got the return on investment when they moved overseas that they thought they would get because they hadn't thought about payments.
Yes, yes. Julia, I think that we are running out of time. We have one more minute. Again, I'd like to thank everybody that joined today and whoever's going to be watching this recording. And a reminder that this research that is qualitative and quantitative in a lot of detail will be coming out next week. You can see here in the comments the link if you like to register to get it by mail. And I give it over to you, Julie, with a last thought around this very important and I guess cross-industry topic. Whatever business merchants are in, this is really something that is important.
I think so, and I hope so. And I think that what we're seeing is an increased recognition, and what we'll hopefully see next time we run this is actually some improvements taking place. So I guess that's something that we will be interested to follow, and we really hope that merchants out there will contact us, with questions. It would be nice to, I guess, make this more of an alive conversation, because that's what we're always trying to do with the research, is have as balanced and 360 a view of the world and of the world as they see it as possible. So I guess looking forward to further conversations, and it seems an important one to have.
And the bottom line, to really see improvement in terms of these losses, and in
Yes.
terms of the satisfaction or dissatisfaction, essentially, that merchants are experiencing frustrations or surprises when going abroad. Thank you very much, Julie, and
Thank you.
thanks to everybody listening.
Thanks, Effie.